The file opens with the slow peel of paper across metal, as if the archive itself is reluctant to expose what lies beneath. On the folder edge, a faded ink stamp reads, "Most Secret, Admiralty Intelligence 1941. Beneath it, a handwritten note in stiff naval script. Account of material recovered from disabled German submarine. Personnel involved, unnamed pending review." The sentence is clinical, almost bloodless. But this is the story of two unarmed Royal Navy sailors who climbed into a dying U-boat, swam through black seawater, and pried from its collapsing hull the documents that helped turn the Battle of the Atlantic. It was an act so reckless, so desperate, that even the Admiralty struggled to record it plainly. But its consequences would echo across the war, shaping every convoy, every interception, every decision made in the cold heart of the Atlantic struggle. Images of WWII soldiers in battle flicker into view, men shoving forward through mud, smoke curling around their helmets. These soldiers fought on land, but their lives depended on the sea. Britain in 1941 was a besieged island. Every rifle, every shell, every bandage, every can of fuel came by ship across the North Atlantic. If the U-boats cut those arteries, the soldiers in Europe would starve long before they reached the continent's liberation. Then come the tanks grinding forward across ruined villages. Their engines needed oil, their crews needed food, their ammunition came from overseas. The Battle of the Atlantic was not a separate front. It was the spine of the entire Allied war effort. Without it, no tank would roll, no aircraft would take off, no invasion map would ever be drawn. Next, we see a ship sinking beneath the waves, a familiar image to Allied sailors in 1941. Entire convoys were being annihilated. The wolf packs hunted in coordination, guided by encrypted radio messages. Germany's Enigma machine protected those signals with layers of mathematical secrecy. Without the key settings, without the codebooks, without the short signal instructions, the Allies were deaf and blind beneath the waves. Then the fighters in formation, engines screaming through cold air. These aircraft patrolled convoy edges when weather allowed, but the mid-Atlantic gap lay far beyond their reach. In that black pit, German submarines struck relentlessly, unseen, unchallenged. It was there that U-110 hunted convoy OB-318, and where fate would deliver the Allies their most valuable prize of the early war. Bombed-out cities appear next, flames licking shattered stone. London burned during the Blitz. Factories collapsed. Civilians fled into shelters. And yet London stood because convoys brought the supplies needed to keep the island alive. Every lost ship meant more suffering. Every submarine sunk meant another day of survival. Then Allied troops landing on beaches, scenes that would define the later years of the war. But in 1941, these invasions were still dreams. The Atlantic had to be won first. Before this could happen, before any landing craft touched enemy shores, the U-boat threat had to be broken. And to break it, the Allies needed to read the enemy's mind. The civilians fleeing destroyed towns remind us that war's victims were not just soldiers. Families, refugees, entire cities depended on the convoys that cut through submarine-infested waters. Each intercepted Enigma message that the Allies could not read meant another ship lost, another family shattered. Radio operators hunched over consoles represent the invisible battlefield of code. They intercepted German signals daily, long strings of indecipherable letters. They knew that inside those transmissions were positions, attack orders, rendezvous points. They could hear the enemy speak, but could not understand him. Red Cross nurses tending to the wounded remind us how much depended on breaking Enigma. Medical supplies, morphine kits, surgical instruments, every crate came by ship. Every one of those ships passed through U-boat waters guided only by guesswork. Lives bled out because the Allies could not yet read the enemy's plans. Generals hunched over invasion maps demonstrate the strategic blindness of early 1941. The Admiralty projected U-boat movements across the Atlantic using rumor, partial information, and desperate calculation. They needed a miracle. They needed the codebooks. And then we see prisoners behind barbed wire, a warning of what awaited any sailor captured at sea, but also a reminder of the danger facing the two men who would enter U-110. A sinking submarine was not merely a mechanical tomb. It was a steel death trap. Flooding compartments, collapsing bulkheads, sharp metal edges, live batteries venting chlorine gas. No one was meant to survive inside a sinking U-boat. No one was meant to enter one either. Propaganda posters flash across the frame, each promising victory, each hiding fear. The Germans believed Enigma unbreakable. The British feared they were right. Every propaganda broadcast, every leaflet, every bulletin echoed the same truth. The war's fate hinged on the Atlantic. Then, submarines at sea, sleek, shadowed, silent. U-110 moves through the water like a predator. On May 9, 1941, it closed in on convoy OB-318, the British destroyers HMS Bulldog and HMS Broadway, along with the corvette HMS Briefings, detected the submarine. Depth charges rolled into the sea. Explosions hammered the water. U-110 shuddered, burst upward, and broke the surface. Her captain, Fritz Julius Lemp, ordered the crew to abandon ship. Men leapt into the freezing water. The submarine floated half dead, its hull fractured, its compartments flooding. The boarding party approached, but this time something unusual happened. The two sailors whose names would be whispered in secure rooms for decades, young, unarmed, trained only in the basics of boarding actions, saw water pouring into the submarine through the open conning tower. Most boarding parties would have kept to the upper deck. The danger of sudden sinking was too great. But these men knew. The codebooks were inside. Winter soldiers trudging through snow appear, a stark reminder of the hardship across all fronts. Yet the cold inside U-110 was worse, dark, metallic, unforgiving. Victory celebrations in Europe flash across the screen, but in 1941 that future was unimaginable. The Allies were losing the Atlantic. But what happened next would help reverse the tide. Inside the submarine, the water was rising fast. The two sailors descended a ladder submerged up to their chests. The electric batteries beneath them could explode at any moment. The floor plates shifted. Loose gear floated around them, wires, tools, food tins. The submarine moaned like a dying beast. They moved deeper, a compartment half flooded, a locker jammed shut. They pried it open with their bare hands. Inside, a waterproof pouch, codebooks, short signal logs, weather encryption keys, the secrets the Admiralty had begged for. They grabbed everything they could carry, stuffing their jackets, tucking documents under their arms. The submarine groaned again, tilting downward. Seawater streamed in faster. They had seconds. One sailor almost slipped beneath the rising water. The other pulled him upward. Together they climbed back toward the conning tower, choking on fumes and darkness. They burst into daylight just as U-110 began her final descent. They leapt into the freezing Atlantic. Moments later, the submarine slipped beneath the surface, taking everything they had not reached into its cold grave. The ruins of Berlin appear, symbolic of the fate that would follow. The Reich would fall. But in 1941, its U-boats were winning. Women working in factories show the unseen front lines of production. Every ship built, every convoy loaded depended on safe passage. Passage that the retrieved codebooks would finally help secure. Artillery fire thunders across a front line, but in the Admiralty's war rooms, the loudest explosion that week came from silence. The silence that followed the deciphering of U-110's secrets. Bletchley Park cryptanalysts could now read messages they had only stared at helplessly before. Convoys began detouring around wolf packs, U-boats found empty seas. For months, Allied losses declined. American and British officers planning D-Day later in the war would rely heavily on the intelligence foundations laid in 1941. Without the early victories over naval enigma, the invasion of Europe might never have been possible. Bombers over a city closed the story. The Allies would take the skies, the seas, and eventually the continent. But the road to victory began in part with two sailors descending into a steel tomb, unarmed underwater, choking on fumes, and emerging with the documents that shifted the balance of the Atlantic War. It is a reminder that the Second World War was won not only by armies or fleets, but by individuals who embraced impossible risks for a chance to change the future. Two sailors, one sinking submarine, and the codebooks that helped save a nation.